here, and I'm glad to have Marcine with me. And it's one of the things that we want to thank. I've already got off to a very bad start. So we'll go back here to the beginning. But CSI and ASPE. So Marcine's a member of ASPE and actually the past national president. And, you know, for that, maybe I'll represent CSI today since I'm not a member of ASPE. But Marcine and I have actually presented this program, I'd say 1.5 times before. It's not a new subject for us. And both of us are really pretty passionate about this thing. So Marcine, I don't know if you want to say anything about your background and before we get going.
No, just ASPE, I am the immediate past president and have served on the national board and then my local board. I actually live in Idaho and have been on boards throughout the west coast of ASPE. But its focus is on providing education standards and certification to construction estimators and professionalism. And that's our focus.
And I would say, as specifiers, we want to be your best friend. Because I think the two of us together are what's going to make this happen, you know, where design does meet construction and we're actually able to stay on budget. So, and thanks to Architectural Glass Institute and Stephanie Staub, she managed to make all the submissions to AIA. So we are able to offer credit. And Corey, I don't know, how are you collecting AIA numbers and such, or those folks that are looking for a certificate?
So there's two ways to do it. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was gonna answer that for you. If everyone who is an AIA member could put in the group chat your AIA number, and do that now in the beginning of the program, and then just when you're ending in the chat, just say thanks or something so we know that you're there at the end, and then that will allow me to submit those contact hours.
All right.
And if for some reason you forget, just feel free to reply to the email I sent out this morning with an AIA number, and you know, we can get it that way as well. Sorry to interrupt. I'm done.
It's all right. I asked the question. I got the answers. Thanks to both of you. Okay, so we are today. We've got a couple of objectives, I guess, and I'll just try to summarize these. I'm not going to read them, but we want to explain how performance descriptions and how continuous estimating can work together. We're seeing much more of this on projects where we're looking at an IPD kind of delivery, which often is also looking at the lean aspects of trying to do target value delivery, which is monitoring the estimate as we go through the project and as we're making decisions about the project. So we want to understand how we can help this whole process. We want to be able to understand what tools we have available today that might be able to help, and then how you can employ all of those tools to get a better result. So what we want to do is just walk through a process. And Marcine has been involved in this kind of a process for a number of times. She's actually taken this on a case study that she might be able to share information about. She probably has a couple that she can share. But we believe that if you follow a process, that it alone is going to help you to get through the estimating, get through continuous estimating, and actually be able to make all your decisions, appropriate decisions, in an appropriate order, at an appropriate time. Because from my perspective as specifier, one of the things that we're seeing that I think is causing some of the issues that we're trying to solve is that design is continuing throughout the project. And there's some very late decisions about design that have some tremendous impact on the project. And when that happens, it tends to create these budget busts, or it tends to put us in a situation where we're fighting value engineering to regain control of the budget. But if we're conscientious about making the decisions as we go through the process, I think we stand a much better chance of getting to the end together. The owner, the designer, the contractor, on budget. Right? So Marcine, the ideal timeline. When does all this stuff need to start?
As soon as possible. And ideally, as soon as an owner has an idea that they want to have a project move forward. A lot of times, no one considers that there needs to be a reconciliation of the scope, the desired scope, to the available budget. And another element of that is the quality level, which is why it's important to have a conceptual cost estimator as well as a specifier that can help set those standards at the very beginning of the project. And that manages the expectations for everybody on the team.
Yeah, so I like to say day one, but the owner says, I need a building for whatever business need that they have. And you need a building, so you're going to identify the kind of building, the kind of things that you're going to house in a building. You're probably going to have a site selected very early in the project. And as soon as you do that, we can start to document the project. So right at the inception. So one of the first things to be looking at is let's try to collect these baseline conditions that we can use to evaluate design decisions and the progress of the design throughout the project. It includes the owner's project requirements, because without the project requirements identified and documented, we can't ever really fully know that we're meeting the requirements. The program, I can't tell you how many projects that we actually start where there's no defined program. And one of the things that the AIA in their standard contracts requires is that architects must review and develop the program with the owner before they even start design. This is like one of the very first steps. If there's no program that exists, how do you know what to design unless you're trying to just design a sculpture that everybody can stand back and admire? But that's not going to satisfy the owner. We want to select the site if one doesn't exist. And as soon as we select that site, we don't even need to know the lot and block. But if we know the project's in Philadelphia and it's going to be an office building, we can already begin to identify all of the constraints that surround that site. The planning constraints, zoning constraints, building code, the environmental constraints, so that once we know Philadelphia, okay, climate zone 4, that has implications, right? We don't need to know exactly what city block this lands in. And it was interesting going back to, I had 2 projects that were in Philadelphia, one on the river, right, on the Schuylkill, and one downtown. Same design firm. They were well into design when I started to ask about the performance requirements for the building so that we could identify what the thermal requirements were for the building envelope. These 2 buildings were 20 blocks apart, and they had completely different environmental design for these 2 buildings. And it was something that nobody had caught as they were going through. The one on the river was at 0° outdoor design temperature, and the one downtown was at 40. And neither one of them were right. So identifying those kinds of early design requirements is really important. I mean, think about a 40° temperature difference, 20 blocks apart, could make a huge impact on the HVAC design, the envelope design, and everything surrounding it. And here, one of Marcine's favorite topics.
Planning the budget. It truly is. You can plan a budget, right? It's not just a guess, and it's not just, well, our last project cost this much a square foot, so we're just going to apply that moving forward. You know, you can early in the process look at this and actually put your hard costs in, put your soft costs, and make sure you cover the financing, and then you have a pro forma, and you can actually make sure the project makes sense. I have a project right now here in Idaho that we're involved. The architect has done some programming, worked with the owner to go through all of their wants and needs. It's for an Indian tribe. And so we know first off that they're likely not going to do another building, right? This is for their agricultural resources and their natural resources, as well as some of their youth outreach, like 4-H on a large Indian tribe land here in Idaho that has a lot of agriculture on it. And so everybody has the wish list of what they want for a program. So the architect went through that process. We know the site, and we know that it is on tribal land. And so we know that anything is going to have to use Davis-Bacon rates and, you know, basically go through tribal financing. So we can build all that up. But the outcome was, when we put all that together, they wanted about a 38,000 square foot building, which is what they needed. But then it comes into, they only have $10 million to do it on hard construction cost. And when you see that early, now, before going into schematic design for the architect, they know they can't design 38,000 square feet, but are instead looking at about 20,000 with the option to expand in the future. And identifying that early, before anyone has started spending time on design, truly allows us to plan that budget and what the available money is.
So it all comes down to the risk, right? So if the architect had plowed ahead thinking he's doing 38,000 square feet, stopped at the end of schematic design, here's the building, 38,000, got it priced, and it came in at 1.5 times the cost, then what? He's already probably shown an image to the owner. The owner has probably already fallen in love with the building, right? But fallen in love with something he can't afford.
Yeah, and each of the users, the architect has designed exactly what the owner asked for. But now each one of those different departments within that tribe, they're expecting that they're going to get that space instead of being able to work toward an overall budget goal and know that they have to give up some space now or share space to move forward, and with the hope that in the future they can actually expand.
Okay, so remember, it's a timeline, it's a progression. Let's go through all of this preliminary stuff first before we even issue an owner's RFP for the design team. And I like this story too that you tell, Marcine, about if we get to the design RFP, what should be one of the very first things the architects or the design teams are looking at?
They should know what the budget is, and based on the description of the scope, if that's achievable. You know, is this going to be a successful project?
Right. So they don't end up in that situation already. If they're taking on a project, the owner says 10 million, says 38,000 square feet, he knows he can't do it. Don't say, thumbs up, hey, we're pressing ahead.
Yeah, and it's the job, you know, a lot of times, especially, you know, in this case with this tribe, they haven't built a building like this in their existence. So they don't know what they're asking for. So it's the job of the professionals, you know, whether it's the design team or the estimators, to actually inform that owner of what they can and can't accomplish. And it makes it successful for the design firm too. You know, it's never good to be chasing scope and budget and quality, especially at the very beginning of a project.
Right. So if we don't know the budget, and I'll go maybe to a much larger scale, we have a hospital project that we're working on now. When we started the project, I actually came right out and asked the architect so that we had some clue as to where we would go. What's the budget? He doesn't know. This is 1 million+ square feet of hospital, and he doesn't have a clue what the budget is. So how do you even begin to start the design if you don't know what your goal is for the budget and being able to satisfy the owner? So it really comes down to, before you even decide to take on a commission, let's make sure the expectations are realistic. 38,000 square feet, $10 million budget, probably not possible. We need to be honest and open up front with the owners to make sure that they understand. We need to make sure the budget and the program are absolutely aligned, right? So if they're asking for way more than they can afford, maybe there is an alternative way to approach it, phased construction, so that they can get something of what they might deem as absolutely critical, followed on by something later. In the case of some owners might have to go out and actually try to solicit funding, or whether through donations or some means of raising capital to even be able to afford it. And from our point, if we see stuff that is missing or incomplete, we're not even anxious to jump into the project, let alone propose on a project. Because if it's missing, incomplete, misaligned, from our point of view, what does that do to our fees? It's a potential risk for us. So whether it's a design fee, specification fee, contractors bid, anytime there's missing or incomplete stuff, it's going to push the risk higher and the fees higher as well. So Marcine, have you ever advised an architect not to take a project?
Absolutely. I have several design firms that I've worked with for a very long time. And they will engage me actually when they're deciding whether to pursue a project. And we'll do that early cost plan up front, because then they can go in to an interview process. First of all, they can decide if they are ever going to make money on the project, because despite all of the fabulous things that designers do and adding to the built environment, you still have to make money because everybody wants to get paid. And the last thing you want to do is have a project that's doomed to lose money from the design side from the very beginning. And there are also sometimes, when expectations are so out of aligned, between the budget and the program, you wonder if the owner is going to be informed throughout. And sometimes when it's so far apart and there's no reason that you can get from the owner about why that is, I have had firms actually make the decision not to pursue projects because of that.
And we are much in the same boat too. So we end up playing this game. Of course, if we have long-term clients, we're going to want to work with them. But even some of those, the first question we might ask is, do you really want to chase after this project? So hopefully you decide it's a go. You respond, you get the project. Then what? We have to make all of this work. So the go, no go decision process should not go away. We want to make informed decisions as we're going through. We want to involve the entire team or as many stakeholders as we can get, because everybody has experience, everybody has expertise, everybody can bring some knowledge to the team. And that knowledge, you bring it all together at the right time, allows you to explore options. And the exploration can actually begin to happen before you start drawing. So Marcine, I know you're conceptual estimating, right?
Absolutely.
Mass and geometry.
Yeah, so one of the tools that we use as conceptual estimators, instead of just relying on what similar projects have cost in the past, we actually rely on a lot of the ratios to develop quantities and focusing more on being able to quantify things early as opposed to be able to just cost them. So if there are options early about massing, are we going to do a large footprint 2-story building, or are we going to go high rise? Being able to answer what effect those kinds of questions have on the cost and on the budget early, before anyone's put a lot of time and effort into that, allows for the design team and the owner to actually make an informed decision about what is best for both the budget and the program.
Right, because those are the ratios, as you're saying, will change the proportion or change the allocation of the cost for the building. So a huge footprint 2-story building is going to have a lot of exterior wall, a lot of roof, where you go to high rise and all of a sudden everything changes. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a difference. There's a definite difference between the expectations if you're doing a Frank Gehry building with the crazy skin everywhere or a spec office building. And knowing that up front helps you make the decisions that you need as you move through the process.
a great lead in. Thanks, Marcine. So if we can look at the systems and alternatives that we might have in the building, the systems could be, think of anything, exterior wall as a system, roof as a system, structure as a system. And maybe we want to explore multiple kinds of exterior walls or multiple kinds of roofs. As specifier, I can describe those systems in a sentence, generally. Marcine can price from that sentence, right? And we can begin to look at the alternatives then if you have multiple things that you want to consider that would be able to satisfy the owner, and do the comparative costs, not to get to this exterior wall is $27.35 per square foot. No, that's not the idea. What we want to do is get to a place where we can compare exterior wall 1 with exterior wall 2 and say, what are the benefits and what are the relative costs in relationship to the entire project, right? So then, Marcine, from all of your historical data, you can begin to guide the decisions about what might be the expectation, right, for these relationships.
Absolutely. And all of this information, from specifying the systems and offering those choices and the associated costs, allows the owner to make the decision that will work best with them. And then they don't feel like they're being, shoved into a decision, because they get to see the pros and cons. And maybe something is important to them, whether it's, a higher initial cost for a lower life cycle cost. They can make those decisions up front.
I say, and then we can adjust, repeat, select other alternatives, and all of this can be done before virtually anything is drawn, and certainly before you develop hard details for any of the systems.
Yeah, and having that initial cost plan with real quantities in it helps you make decisions. And also that testing against the baseline is important, right? If we assumed when we set this budget or confirmed this budget that there was, let's say 10,000 square feet of glazing on the exterior wall, but as you're starting to explore different options in schematic design and you want to add glazing, knowing how we can trade and shift among components to actually pay for that add, so that you're testing back against the baseline to see what's changed, allows you to make those informed decisions as a design team as well.
Right. So one of the tools that we're trying to propose that the design teams are using is a uniformat organization. A uniformat is based on building functional elements. So I'm showing you a snippet here from function element B, which is shell. It includes the exterior enclosure, exterior walls. And once we get down into defining walls, now we can segregate the building into multiple components. In this case, we have a description of podium walls, and maybe there's a separate description for tower walls, because this happened to be for a casino with a hotel tower associated. But in the description, we want to be able to, like I said, in a sentence, provide something that Marcin can price. And looking at how that relates to a building model,
I don't know.
you might want to consider that this is a level 100 model. Could be a generic element in the building model, but it's still something that can be priced. As we begin to develop additional detail, what is the performance? If we know what the environmental requirements are for the building, we can start to set out the performance and ultimately set out the detail of what this exterior wall is. And with the components that we've listed, now we can begin to actually make a connection to where will these things be specified, so that we've already written the roadmap for creating the construction spec, but we haven't written the spec. So in this case, exterior wall, this could be a half-page document describing the exterior wall before anything is even drawn. And oh, by the way, the list of the components, the description of the wall becomes the designer's guide for actually detailing. And meanwhile, Marcin is providing more and more specific estimating information.
And it helps us refine the cost, right? The simple sentence, the estimator has to assume different risk, understanding what's in that. The more refined that is early, the costs are also able to be refined early and dialed in.
So, and we want all the estimates to go this way, right, Marcin?
Absolutely.
The more detail you get, the lesser the cost, the less the risk. It's not always the case.
No, sometimes someone will throw a little detail in that makes the cost go up, but at least we know about that and actually can have a line item for it.
Right. And if you see it happening, then there's an opportunity to adjust to be able to accommodate it. But if you wait until the end of design development or the end of CD and then discover it, now you're into rework. One of our favorite topics, right, Marcin?
Absolutely.
What if? This never happens on the job, right? We never have a crisis. We never have anybody change their mind. We never have market conditions affect anything, right?
Yeah, or we've purposely not talked about the big changes that we've had this year. And so we have some other what if scenarios. Being able to have that baseline estimate and continuously updating it throughout the design process allows us to actually respond quickly and in an informed way to changing conditions. So let's say that hurricanes pounded the Gulf Coast and oil production is halted, which means PVC supplies are disrupted. Being able to go through the estimate and pick out the line items that will have an effect on, and being able to adjust that so you can see the impact to the overall project, to see if there are adjustments or changes that need to be made so that we can respond to that. And knowing whether that's a short-term issue that, we're halfway through design development, we're not going to bid this for another 8 months, everything should have been okay. So we can continue knowing that there's a risk for costs in those particular line items. Or another thing that could happen, Dave wouldn't put in trade restrictions, because I was going to say, what if Japan declares war on China and all of a sudden everything is completely disrupted and we can't get any steel or glass or aluminum? What is that going to do to your job? And knowing the cost impact of that. Dave was much nicer than me and said it was just trade restrictions.
Well, and these are real world things going on here. I mean, I think about some of the projects that we have today where we're relying heavily on materials coming from China. And we had multiple projects, high-rise projects in Philadelphia, that we're buying all of their fenestration systems from China and the glass. And what happens when this stuff is disrupted? If now you completely disrupt the supply chain and you have the building under construction, what do you do?
And a lot of times it's just important to be able to, you know, as the design professionals and the team, the design and construction professionals and the team that are going to answer the questions for the owners, you know, if they are hearing something on the news, you know, this happened a lot with steel pricing, right? Steel pricing is doubling. Well, if you have your quantity in your estimate and you're continuously estimating, you know, you can decide, you know, you can instantly show the owner, okay, we have this many tons of steel. The doubling is on the supply price, not the manufactured and installed price. So this is the impact of that news story on your project. We feel like we're okay. And being able to have that information for the owner. The other issue is the other way, right? Everything doesn't have to be bad. What if an owner during the design was awarded more money available for a project? Maybe they got a grant or their borrowing costs were reduced, so they wanted to plow that money into the project. Being able as a design team to see, you know, here's what we currently have for our HVAC and electrical systems. If we put more money in now, we can offer a system that will have a lower life cycle cost for you to have over the next 40 years. And being able to have the data available to make those informed decisions as things change is critical, not just for the project to keep it moving without circling in a continuous spin cycle, but it helps the owner know that you're actually watching out for them and their best interest and giving them the best product available.
Yeah, and it could be the owner decides, hey, I'll just take the money. You know, I'm
Yeah.
happy with where the project is. It'll satisfy everything that we've got, and I could use the money elsewhere. It doesn't have to get plowed back into this project. So as we go through the whole process, right, we want to look at each one of these systems, be able to look at it as a design decision. We want to be able to choose an optimum solution. We'll never be able to get to all best solutions. I don't think there's such a thing that actually exists on a design and construction project, but we'll try to get to an optimum solution, something that's going to solve most, maybe not even all of the owner's requirements, but most, and we'll adjust the requirements as well as we look at the solutions. But we want to do all of this before we really start drawing, before we start specifying. And as we're making these decisions and moving forward, we want to have everybody confident that the decisions that are reliable now, that they actually can move forward and do it only just once. Do it once. How many projects are you involved in, Marcine, with value engineering?
Well, value engineering as it's currently defined, almost, if we've been involved and been able to do this continuously, we don't get to design development and have to make cuts because we've been informed all along. If we come in late with being able to do this kind of accurate estimating instead of just the dollars per square foot baseline, you know, the benchmarking against other projects, a lot of times you do have to do not real value engineering, but cost cutting. And how nice would it be to have all of this going through where you can actually do the real value engineering that adds value to the building instead of just always looking for cost cutting and having to take things out.
Yeah, I would venture that with our projects today, 95% plus are at going through value engineering at some point in the process. And it's really disruptive because the best time on the design side to get your coordination right is the first pass through the information. So that if you have to go back and redo, whether it's redo drawings, redo specifications, throw specifications away, and we've had to do that, and start over, the confidence in the coordination starts to plummet, because you can't remember all of those things that you had to take into consideration as you're trying to build the project mentally the first time that you're doing it. Because now you're just in the mode of, I have to fix this. I have to do this revision. Instead of, let's build it again mentally, let's build it right and document what we know should be done. Is very, very difficult.
And that has a real impact on the cost when a project is bid, right? There's always this, I don't know, maybe not contention, but a stress between the designers and the builders, because everybody assumes it is kind of a contentious relationship a lot of times. That the better the documents, the less risk the builder has to take into account as they're bidding. And so that helps get better pricing at the bid time as well.
So let me just back up and show the entire program again here. So, and I know that we've had a bunch of questions. Corey, I don't know if you're monitoring any of the questions, and I'm seeing some of them coming in privately to me. So you're probably not seeing those.
Oh, yikes.
I can try to go back and try to collect those and see if we can answer them. But I think my major message here is, think about bringing the estimator and the specifier into the project early. Take advantage of the kinds of skills that they can bring to the project. And when I say estimator too, I want you to always be thinking about Marcine. Well, because there are estimators and there are estimators. In another lifetime ago, I was an estimator, and I'm glad I'm not. I'm glad Marcine's there to do it. But think about, for the early stages, finding somebody that is highly qualified as a conceptual estimator, because conceptual estimating is truly different than detailed takeoff estimating. And detailed takeoff estimating works when you have the information that you can measure, when you have the information you can count, but it doesn't necessarily work that well at a conceptual level before anything is drawn. And Marcine, I don't know if you want to, I'm sure you have much to say on that subject, so I should just be quiet and let you fill in. I'll look at what these questions are. Maybe we can take some of those.
No, that's fine. I'm going to apologize because there's a train going by my office, so you might hear train noise in the background. So I have never worked for a contractor, so I have never actually bid work. My specialty has always been in conceptual, and I would not be able to actually bid a job. It's a different skill set. So I think being able to find someone who is experienced and has a successful track record at their conceptual estimates actually bearing out when they get to bid is important to have as part of a team.
So we have a question from Mark Kennedy, if you want to let him jump in.
Go ahead.
Let's see if he can unmute himself. Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, Dave and Marcine.
Hello, Mark.
So my question is, during the costing process, have you had owners who wanted to have a lead building designed and built and then decided against it after they saw the additional costs involved?
Yes, and depending on what level of lead you're going for. I have a project right now at a community college that a lot of times the same cost isn't as much on the added cost of lead isn't as significant as it was 10 and 20 years ago because codes have caught up so much. So a lot of times a code compliant building will get you a lead. It just depends on which level of lead. So it's not as often anymore that the costs are prohibitive, but going certainly to lead platinum actually is, and being able to scale those things back. Being able to cost those items that are driving to that higher level of lead early it's always better to make those decisions early as opposed to later in the process where you have to take things out and rework.
Yeah, and Mark, we've seen LEED as a requirement, particularly in publicly funded work, where it actually is a public mandate to go to LEED. Not so much in the private work, like we were seeing in the early 2000s when it was a new concept. And the only one that I've seen that I recall where the design was actually changed was not for LEED, but was for passive house, where initially it was designed for passive house. And by the time they got around to going to construction, they had removed all the passive house requirements. What else do you have for us, Corey?
Not much. I mean, there was another question early. It was from Matt. It looks like it says, in multi-family market, we often have an early design decision like that to determine whether a 5-story building should be 4+1 podium and wood, parentheses 1A, 5A construction, or 5-story wood, parentheses 3B construction. Often seems to be very timing and geography dependent. Good God. Which one is less expensive for the same massing?
Yeah, and I would imagine I probably do, I don't know, 2 studies a week for clients early in the process, trying to decide whether, you know, what structural system they should use. Or should we do concrete? Should we do wood? Should we do steel? And so we'll do a comparative study. And it truly depends on exactly what Matt's talking about. You know, is it the geography, how readily available things are, and also the current market. And it's a little bit of a, managing risk because the market could change. There could be wildfires enough that all of a sudden wood is expensive, which is what's happening in the West right now. I don't know if that's hit you guys as much, but
the supply chain is taking care of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, lumber prices are a little ridiculous at the moment, if you can find the lumber.
So if anyone has any other questions they want to throw into the chat, feel free to. Those are the only 2 I had that were sent directly to me.
Okay. Well, it's
Otherwise,
been a pleasure.
Yeah, as I say, we can have another like 2 minutes to ask for questions. Otherwise, you can kind of turn off your screen and we can all do a yelling over each other session.
All right, I'll stop sharing and then we can go back to turn on everyone's video if you like.
Yep, if everyone wants to just make it mass chaos, feel free to.
Thanks for jump starting that one, Corey.
Yeah, that's right. Here it goes. So it'll be a big old group. We appreciate everybody coming out. There'll be I should have stopped the recording. Silly.